Danielle, 31 years old, never imagined her older brother would become the villain in the story of her life. I had always assumed betrayal would come from someone distant, someone without blood ties, not from the very person I once defended in fights, loaned money to without hesitation, and helped get back on his feet after every disastrous breakup. I thought I was doing the right thing by setting boundaries when he asked to move into my house. But that decision, that simple word no, became the match that set fire to everything. I owned a modest but beautiful two-story home in Charleston, South Carolina, tucked near the outskirts of town in a neighborhood that balanced peace and proximity to everything. It was my sanctuary, renovated with my own hands over 4 years. I had refinished the pine floors, replaced the kitchen cabinets with pale sea glass blue ones, and even installed a small porch swing out front where I'd sip tea in the evenings after work. It was not just a house. It was a physical representation of every overtime hour, every skipped vacation, and every moment I had chosen discipline over indulgence. So when my brother, Aaron, came to me asking if he and his new girlfriend could move in just until they figured things out, I didn't hesitate to shut it down. He had a pattern, jumping from couch to couch, woman to woman, blaming the world for his inability to grow up. His latest flame was a girl named Sierra, some social media influencer type who had a TikTok channel full of makeup tutorials and wine-fueled rants about her exes. I barely knew her, but I knew the type. He claimed they were serious, that they just needed a stable place to start over, but I knew what that meant. My house would become a war zone of late-night fights, loud music, and dirty dishes left in the sink. I told him no. He argued for hours. He said I was cold. He called me heartless. He even tried guilt, reminding me of all the times he looked out for me when we were younger. But I stood my ground. He left that night in a fury, and I truly thought that was the end of it. For nearly a month, I heard nothing from him. No texts, no calls, no passive-aggressive likes on social media. It was eerily quiet, and I allowed myself to believe he had finally taken the hint. Life went on. I worked, hosted a few friends for dinner, enjoyed quiet evenings with candles burning in the windows and jazz playing low in the background. Until the day I came home from work and everything felt wrong. My house key did not fit the front door. I tried again, slower this time, confused but not yet panicked. Still nothing. I jiggled the lock, checked the address as if I could somehow be at the wrong house, then paused. I could hear voices inside. Laughing. Music. A woman's voice. Then his. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest, so hard I could feel it in my throat. I did not knock. I did not call. I walked right back to my car, locked the doors, and called the police. 30 minutes later, 2 officers stood beside me on the porch. No one answered when they knocked. They announced themselves. Still no response. I stood there as they used a ram to break the door open. The crack of wood splintering was louder than I expected. It echoed in my ears, but nothing prepared me for what I saw next. There, on the floor of my living room, on the rug I had bought from a vintage shop in Savannah, was my brother. Shirtless. Wrapped around him like a twisted vine was Sierra, barely covered by a blanket that looked suspiciously like one of mine. The place reeked of weed, cheap perfume, and something foul that I never identified. Plates of half-eaten food were on the floor. My furniture had been moved. A mirror was cracked. There were clothes, hers, his, scattered across the couch. And boxes. Boxes filled with their things as if they had lived there for weeks. Aaron looked up like a deer in headlights. Then, as if trying to regain control, he turned to Sierra and told her everything was fine, that I would not do anything, that I would calm down, that it was his house now too, and I would not dare throw him out. He was so wrong. I looked the officers dead in the eye and told them to detain him. I pressed charges on the spot. He was stunned as they turned him around and locked the cuffs onto his wrists. He shouted that he would not just let it go, that I was ruining his life, that I would regret it. I stood there, unflinching. My patience had expired. He had crossed the line from manipulation to criminality, and I was not about to hand him a free pass. He had changed the locks. He had illegally entered my home. He had moved in without my knowledge or consent. He had committed trespassing, vandalism, and theft. I documented everything. I photographed every inch of the damage. I found my missing jewelry stuffed into one of Sierra's makeup bags. I found my unopened credit card statement crumpled in the trash. I I found a receipt for a delivery order in his name dated 2.5 weeks before. They had been squatting in my house for nearly a month. The lawsuit was swift and brutal. I hired a lawyer from downtown Charleston who specialized in property disputes and unlawful occupancy cases. I handed over every shred of evidence. Photos, receipts, doorbell camera footage showing Aaron and Sierra walking up to the house with bags even after I had left for a business trip. Emails where he had asked for a key and I had clearly refused. Texts where he called me names for not helping him. His threats to handle things himself. Court was not kind to him. Sierra tried to claim they thought I was away for the season and that he had permission, but under cross-examination, she fell apart. She admitted they had changed the locks, that they used a locksmith under a fake story, and that they had thrown away some of my belongings. Aaron's rage boiled over in the courtroom. He shouted that it was all unfair, that I had left him no choice. But none of it mattered. The judge ruled in my favor on every count. The restitution order was over $12,000 for damages, unlawful entry, and emotional distress. He had to pay legal fees. He had to complete court-ordered therapy. Sierra disappeared shortly after the ruling, probably off to find a new man to squat with. As for Aaron, he was humiliated. Everyone in the family heard about it. Not because I told them, but because he did, spinning stories about how I overreacted and treated him like a criminal. I did not care. I blocked them all. Every cousin who said I should have handled it privately. Every aunt who said, "But he's still your brother." No. That line died the day he changed my locks and pretended my life was his to invade. Now my house is mine again. I replaced the locks, installed a new security system with remote alerts, and had the walls repainted to rid myself of the energy they left behind. I sit on my porch swing at sunset, watching the light fall through the Spanish moss hanging from the oaks. It is quiet again. It is peaceful again. And I learned something valuable. Blood does not mean family. Boundaries are not suggestions. And if someone wants to turn your sanctuary into their disaster zone, you are not cruel for saying no. You are wise for locking the door. Update 1. I thought the worst part would be discovering my brother had turned my home into his personal crash pad, but I was wrong. The real shock came weeks later, when he realized I was not bluffing, not posturing, not playing the role of the dramatic sister who would calm down and let it go. I sued him, and I did it with precision, documentation, and a level of cold resolve that surprised even me. The moment the lawsuit papers were served, everything shifted. Up until then, Aaron had clung to this delusion that family status was a shield, that blood was some kind of legal immunity. He truly believed that I would fold under pressure, that I would get tired, that I would accept an apology whispered through our mother or an aunt acting as a messenger. Instead, he was met with court dates, filing deadlines, and the unmistakable reality that the legal system now had his name stamped across multiple documents describing criminal behavior. Trespass, illegal lock replacement, property damage, theft, fraudulent representation to a locksmith. The list was not short, and it was not forgiving. Watching him walk into court that first day was surreal. Gone was the smug confidence he had worn while sprawled across my living room floor. Gone was the certainty that I would protect him from consequences. He looked smaller, tighter, like a man who had finally realized that the ground beneath him was not solid. I felt nothing for him in that moment. No satisfaction, no pity, just a sharp, focused clarity. I had crossed the point of no return, and so had he. The proceedings dragged on for weeks, each hearing peeling back another layer of how deeply he had violated my trust and my property. Evidence stacked up fast. The locksmith testified. The police reports were read into the record. Photographs of my damaged home were displayed. Financial records showed purchases made from my address during the time I was away. Even Sierra's digital footprint betrayed them. Posts tagged from my neighborhood while they claimed they had only been there briefly. The case should have been airtight, and for the most part, it was. When the ruling finally came down, my brother lost. On paper, I won. The judge found him liable, ordered restitution, and imposed a large fine that would follow him for years. It was not pocket change. It was the kind of number that forced lifestyle changes, that destroyed any illusion of financial freedom he had left. People congratulated me. Friends said justice had been served. Family members whispered that this was what happens when you cross boundaries. But inside, something burned. I had expected more. I had expected accountability that matched the scale of what he did. I had expected consequences that carried weight beyond money. I had expected him to be led away in cuffs again, this time not just for show, but for real. Instead, he walked out owing money, angry, and very much free. And that was when the pieces started to fall into place. The speed of the ruling. The way certain evidence was brushed past instead of examined. The oddly generous framing of his intent. The fine was heavy, yes, but the absence of jail time felt deliberate. Calculated. Wrong. I knew my brother. I knew his habits, his desperation when cornered, and his complete lack of moral restraint when survival was at stake. It did not take a genius to connect the dots. Money had changed hands. Favors had been called in. Someone in that courtroom had decided that consequences could be negotiated. The realization hit me harder than the break-in ever had. I left that courthouse shaking, not from fear or sadness, but from rage so controlled it felt like ice under my skin. The law had worked just enough to appear functional, just enough to silence casual criticism, but not enough to be truly just. My brother had learned nothing except that corruption had a price, and that he could still avoid the worst of what he deserved. He was furious at me, humiliated publicly, financially wounded, but not destroyed. And that infuriated me more than anything he had done before. I had followed every rule. I had done everything right. I had trusted the system to finish what I started. Instead, it flinched. As I drove home that night, past streets glowing under warm southern lights, past houses where people felt safe behind their doors, I understood something with brutal clarity. The court had closed one chapter, but it had not ended the story. Not even close. My brother thought he had escaped the worst of it. The judge thought the matter was resolved. Everyone around me believed this was the conclusion. They were all wrong. I was not satisfied. I was not calm. And I was very, very angry that the court had not been completely fair. Update 2. I thought the courtroom betrayal was the lowest point, the moment that proved how deeply my brother was willing to sink, but I was wrong again. The real emotional execution came not under fluorescent courthouse lights, but under warm decorative string lights strung across my parents' backyard, during what was supposed to be a family holiday meant to pretend we were still something resembling whole. I almost did not go. Something in my gut warned me that showing up was a mistake, but part of me still clung to the illusion that blood would eventually override lies. I told myself that whatever poison Aaron had been spreading would collapse under the weight of truth once people saw me in person. I arrived with a carefully chosen gift, neutral, polite, restrained, determined not to bring tension into a space already thick with it. The smell of grilled food hung in the air, familiar and comforting, the kind of scent tied to childhood memories I had not yet accepted were no longer mine. The moment I stepped through the gate, everything felt off. Conversations stalled. Faces stiffened. People avoided eye contact with the precision of rehearsed discomfort. I recognized it instantly, the aftermath of a narrative already told without me in the room. My mother did not smile. My father did not nod. My aunts stood clustered together like a silent jury. My brother was already there, relaxed, seated, occupying space as if he had not been dragged out of my house in handcuffs weeks earlier. I barely had time to process the shift before it happened. I was not asked to sit. I was not offered a plate. Instead, I was told, in front of everyone, that I did not belong there. The words landed like blunt force trauma. Adopted. Outsider. Never welcome at the same table again. It was not said with hesitation or confusion. It was delivered with conviction, like a verdict already agreed upon. The implication was clear. I was no longer family. I was a problem that had finally been removed. My brother stood back and let it happen. He had already done his work. Somewhere between the court ruling and this holiday, he had rewritten history. He told them I was unstable, vindictive, greedy. He claimed I had fabricated the break-in. He said I had manipulated the police, exaggerated damages, humiliated him out of spite. He painted himself as a victim of a sister who had always resented him, who had waited for the right moment to destroy him financially. He even twisted the adoption lie into a weapon, framing it as proof that I had never truly been one of them, that I had no right to enforce boundaries or claim ownership over anything connected to the family name. And they believed him, every single one of them. I stood there, holding a gift bag that suddenly felt ridiculous, listening to people I had loved reduce me to an inconvenience. Years of holidays, shared meals, forced smiles, and unspoken compromises evaporated in seconds. No one asked for my side. No one questioned his story. The fine, the lawsuit, the police report, all of it was spun into evidence of my cruelty instead of his crimes. I realized then that the court had not been the only institution willing to accept corruption as long as it came packaged neatly. I left without arguing. I walked out because staying would have meant breaking something, screaming, exposing a level of fury that would have only confirmed the image he had constructed. But the restraint nearly tore me apart. I sat in my car afterward, hands locked around the steering wheel, breathing shallow, vision narrowed, heart pounding so violently it felt like it might crack my ribs from the inside. That was the moment something inside me shifted permanently. Up until then, I had still believed in limits. Legal limits. Moral limits. Emotional limits. I had told myself that winning in court was enough, that financial penalties were justice, that walking away was strength. Sitting there alone, rejected not just by my brother, but by an entire family that chose comfort over truth, I understood how naive that belief had been. They had chosen him. They had erased me. They had rewritten my place in their lives without my consent, just like he had rewritten my right to my own home. The anger that followed was not loud at first. It was cold, precise, and consuming. It wrapped itself around every thought, every memory, every compromise I had ever made for the sake of peace. I replayed every unpaid favor, every defended mistake, every time I had chosen silence over confrontation. I saw clearly how that pattern had trained them to believe they could discard me without consequence. By the time I started the car, I was no longer shaking. I was done being reasonable. I was done waiting for fairness from systems and people who had already proven they would never give it willingly. The family holiday had not just exiled me. It had stripped away the last illusion holding me back. I was furious beyond restraint, and for the first time since all of this began, I was ready for anything. Update 3. The end did not come with a courtroom gavel or a final message sent into the void. It arrived quietly, methodically, and in pieces, because by the time I reached that point, I no longer wanted closure. I wanted consequences that could not be appealed, explained away, or softened by family loyalty. After the holiday exile, I disappeared from their lives the way they had erased me from the table. I stopped responding to messages I already knew would never come with sincerity. I stopped defending myself. I stopped correcting lies. Silence became my cover, and distance became my advantage. While they congratulated themselves on having handled the situation, I was watching, waiting, and planning in a way that did not leave fingerprints. It started with their cars. Every relative who had looked at me like a stranger, who had nodded along while my brother rewrote reality, who had accepted the adoption lie without hesitation, had one thing in common. They relied on their vehicles. Commutes, school runs, weekend trips, appearances. I never touched anything that could be traced directly back to me. No witnesses, no cameras, no predictable timing. Just damage that appeared overnight, scattered across different days, different streets, different parking lots. Side panels dented beyond simple repair. Tires ruined in ways that suggested road debris. Paint scratched where no camera could catch a reflection. Enough to cost them money, time, and stress, but never enough to prove intent or point to a single person. They talked, of course. Accusations bounced between them like static. Insurance claims were denied. Repair bills piled up. Everyone suspected someone, but no one could agree on who. I stayed invisible. I was already packing. My brother's downfall came differently. Slower. More personal. By then, he had stabilized, at least on the surface. A steady job. A girlfriend who actually seemed good for him. Someone grounded, patient, normal. The kind of relationship he had always ruined on his own eventually. I did not rush it. I waited until they were comfortable, until the cracks were no longer visible from the outside. Then I stepped in quietly. At a family celebration I was not invited to but knew about anyway, I did not show my face. I did not need to. His phone was left unattended long enough for opportunity to do its work. No dramatic hacks. No elaborate schemes. Just familiarity. I knew how he wrote. I knew the tone he used when he thought no one was watching. I crafted correspondence that looked real because it was real enough. Flirtation. Familiarity. Intimacy implied, but never explicit enough to scream fabrication. Messages that could not be easily dismissed as fake because they sounded like him. I put the phone back exactly where it belonged and walked away from that part of my life for good. Time did the rest. Weeks later, the relationship collapsed under the weight of suspicion and proof that could not be explained away. His girlfriend did not scream or confront me. She simply left. Cleanly. Completely. The kind of ending that offers no second chances. The kind that forces reflection without mercy. My brother unraveled after that. The normalcy he had finally stumbled into vanished overnight. The stability he bragged about disappeared. And this time, there was no one to blame publicly without sounding unhinged. He knew it was me. They all did. By then, they had started connecting dots they could never fully trace. The cars. The timing. The sudden collapse of his relationship. The way everything began to rot from the inside out after I was pushed away. They whispered my name like a curse, but they had nothing concrete. No proof. No address. No access. Because I was already gone. I moved to another city without announcements or goodbyes, somewhere far enough to feel like a clean slate, but familiar enough to build quickly. New lease. New routines. New people who knew nothing about my family history or the lies attached to my name. I changed my number. I locked down my online presence. I became unreachable in every way that mattered. From a distance, I heard fragments. Financial strain. Repairs they could not afford. Tension at gatherings where my absence became louder than my presence ever was. My brother spiraled quietly, trapped between knowing what I had done and knowing he could never prove it without exposing his own history of manipulation. The family fractured under the weight of shared guilt and unspoken fear. Each of them wondering who might be next, each of them aware that the person they cast out had not disappeared weakly. The story ended not with reconciliation, not with forgiveness, not with apologies that came too late to matter. It ended with distance, consequences, and a life rebuilt without them. I did not go back. I did not check in. I did not feel regret. They taught me what they thought I was worth, and I showed them what it cost to underestimate me.